Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're continuing on the series with reciprocating saw blades, mainly because reciprocating saws are pretty much only as good as the blade you put on them. So in this sub-series of the episode, we're going to be taking a look at the thick metal cutting reciprocating saw blades. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at the DeWalt brand, okay? So one of the reasons I'm talking about the DeWalt brand is because most everybody knows the DeWalt brand is owned by the Stanley Black Decker group. The main reason I'm pointing that out is because some of the technology may be shared with some of their other brands. You know, not all companies will do that, some companies will, but in this case it seems highly likely. So we're going to talk about that in just a little bit more, all right? So in today's episode, we're going to look at the 2X long life bimetal blade versus pretty much the Elite series carbide tipped blades from DeWalt and see how they really perform against thick metal. All right, so in today's episode we're going to pretty much, like I said, skip through all the easy stuff like cutting through EMT, conduit, you know, basic screws, basic nails, and units and all that stuff. We're gonna skip all that stuff, mainly because everybody knows most bimetal blades on the market today that are, you know, generally reputable are gonna cut through that stuff without a problem. So we're gonna make 3 hard cuts, or attempt to make 3 hard cuts through spring steel. The spring steel that we are using is part of a leaf spring from a previous generation F-150 that we used to have. We pretty much took it to scrap, so we're using that material and try to cut 3 passes with each blade, assuming each blade can even make it, and then we're going to see how that performs, or how these blades perform compared to other blades we've tested so far. So if you're really interested in this and you're interested in the other blades that Stanley Black Decker Group may be copying from, you want to stay tuned. You don't want to miss this. Stick with us. So this right here is a DeWalt 2X long life general purpose bimetal blade. This is a 10 TPI blade and the model number is DWA4176. It says general purpose, but for whatever reason, all the looking around I did, I couldn't find a 2X long life blade that said it was for only metal or thick metal or metal only. All we could find was a 2X long life general purpose blades. Maybe that's just my area, maybe that's just a few stores that I went to, but I don't know. This is the one that I was able to find. And even on this picture, it has a nail or wood, nails, nail embedded wood, and also an I-beam looking here. So this blade is obviously designed for cutting metal, because there's a picture of a metal I-beam right there. So is it 2 times a longer life? I'm not sure, but that's what we're going to find out today, right? So looking at the blade teeth design here, you can kind of see here if we bring it up close, the teeth are pretty sharp. The offset is not super aggressive, it's a little bit conservative, but the teeth are pretty sharp with pretty big gussets, especially for a bimetal blade, right? So looking at these teeth, you're probably going to say cutting into that spring steel is probably going to round it off real quick, but you know, we're here to find out. So that's what we're going to find out. That's what the bimetal blade looks like. This right here is actually the DeWalt Elite series blade. This right here is an 8 TPI blade designed for thick metal, and as you can see right here, the model number is 6108CT. Has a picture of an I-beam right there. And if you look at the teeth offset here, the teeth offset is a little bit aggressive for a carbide tooth blade. This blade is obviously a little bit used. We've kind of already ran the test. So if you look at it, you know, that's pretty much what you're going to be getting here. The interesting thing about this blade is that this blade has an almost exact copy replica of a Lennox blade, in case you've seen the Lennox blade. But before we go look at that, let's go take a little bit of the marketing here. So this marketing here has a picture of a steel I-beam cast iron carbide tip. It says 25% longer life versus Diablo. Let's see if we can bring it up close. 25% longer life versus Diablo, the DS0608CF carbide to the blade cutting, right? So for stainless steel pipe. So this is obviously designed for thick metal, and we're here to find out what that means, okay? The interesting thing about this marketing, as you can see right here, it says made in USA with global materials. And keep that in mind, because one thing we're going to look at, like I mentioned earlier, is that this blade is almost an exact copy of the Lennox Lazer CT blade, right? So let's bring that in. So right here is obviously the DeWalt bimetal blade. This right here is a Lennox Lazer CT blade, as we checked out in episode, I think it was like 11 or something like that. But even if you look at the design of the blade is almost exactly the same, right? Just look at it. This right here is obviously a little bit longer blade, and this is the shorter blade. But even if you look very closely at the teeth design, it is almost an exact replica. looking at it this way, right? The teeth look almost exactly the same. And if you look at the beginning part here, even the beginning part is the same. If you look at the first few teeth don't actually have carbide tips welded on there. You know, that obviously saves a few bucks. Because, you know, that beginning part of the blade almost never really gets used. And even on both, let's look at both the DeWalt and the Lennox blade, both of them are exactly the same. Both of them don't have any carbide welded on there. Okay, so in the model numbering seems almost even exactly the same too. So this right here is the 6108 CT. The thick metal one you probably won't be able to see on here, but the model number is following very similar. Okay, so if you look at the shorter version of the Lennox blade, it does come out to a different model number, or a model number very close. But even if you look at the longer version, it definitely comes out very close, right? So this one is a 9108R CT. This is obviously a 9-inch blade. The 6 probably stands for this being a 6-inch blade. Okay, so that's no secret that the Stanley Black Decker group owns the DeWalt brand, and obviously, well, I don't know if it's that obvious, but most people may or may not know this, but also owns the Lennox brand. Okay, so these two are owned by the same brand. Most likely they're going to be manufactured in the exact same facility, so they're probably going to be almost exactly the same blade, but you know, only testing is really going to let us know. Okay, so the other thing to figure out here is that even though they are both owned by the same brand, interestingly enough, both of these are only sold at the big box store of like Lowe's, right? You would imagine, you know, to kind of building another brand or building the exact same model and stuff like that, you want to get into larger stores or get larger market share where they're selling on different online stores, or even at like competitor places like, you know, Home Depot or something like that. But interestingly enough, both of these right now, at least locally around where I'm at, are only found in the store at the Lowe's. Okay, so another interesting thing to point out here is that most DeWalt blades, even all the other bimetal blades that we've seen so far, wood nails, nail embedded wood, metal only, just wood blades are positioned this way, right? All the marketing and stuff like that is on this part of the blade. All of the Elite series blade, which are carbide tipped blades, are actually painted on or marketed this way, this other direction. That I think only helps add to the fact that these two are manufactured in exactly the same facility, using exactly the same process. You know, the material of the carbide or something like that may differ, mainly because they probably want to be able to offset the differences between some of the brands. But in order to cut down on cost and marketing, you're probably going to say they're going to be exactly the same, even down to the stamp and even the manufacturing entire process, where all the paint, markings or whatnot are on this side of the blade. So, you know, that's what the blades look like. So let's go take a look at the testing and see how they perform. All right, that test was pretty interesting. It may or may not be what expected, but let's go take a look at the numbers. So obviously this right here is the bimetal blade, the bimetal blade that was used. If you look at it really closely here, all the teeth have been completely rounded off. There are no teeth where the teeth are contacting the metal, okay? So if you look at it this way, all the teeth are completely gone. If you want to look at what it should look like, here, let's underlay the same blade right over it, and that's what it should look like versus what the teeth do look like. So this didn't really get too far, as you would imagine. It's a bimetal blade, even though it's 2 times longer life. It may have made, it may have cut a little bit deeper than the other bimetal blades, but it was nowhere deep enough to actually make a really big impact. Okay, but like we said earlier, these are set for general purpose. For whatever reason, there was no 2x long life metal only blade, so it may have something to do with it. All right. So this right here is obviously still the same Elite Series blade. The store that we were in only had one of these in stock, so we only got one of them. But as you look here, all the carbide parts are still there, or not all there, but one of them's missing, but they are chipped. There's a lot of damage to some of the carbide. Actually, if you look at this side, there's chips there, but only one of them seems to be completely missing, right? So you could probably get a little bit of longer life out of this blade just by putting more downforce and just cutting through it. This part right here is used mainly because I wanted to see if the metal was hardened by cutting a new part of the blade after the 3rd test pretty much stalled out, to see if a new part of the blade could cut through that. And surprisingly, interestingly enough, it made only a little bit of progress and then didn't make any more progress, right? So if you look closely here, there's a little bit of darkening of the metal in the blade here. That's mainly because by the time the 3rd test stalled out on this part of the blade, the metal had already heat hardened, and then cutting or trying a new part of the blade was unable to make a significant impact. So by not cutting very well through that part of the blade on that piece of metal, hardened it enough so that it actually got a lot harder. Okay, so that's what the blade looks like after it's been used. What does the number say? Let's go take a look at it. So that test may have been a little bit more interesting. We may have expected different results, but let's go see what the numbers say. All right, so the DeWalt 2X Life DWA4176, which is a bimetal 10 TPI blade. On the first run, obviously it just didn't finish. The second run did not finish. Third run did not finish. It just wasn't able to make any significant dent in the leaf spring or spring steel material. So it just wasn't really much of a challenge, or at least there wasn't really anything there. The challenge was too big, let's just say, right? So this blade costs roughly around $3.20 per blade, and you get roughly about a 5-pack for about $16-ish. So that's what you're really getting. So let's move on to the Elite Series carbide tip blade. The blade that we're using right now is the DWAR6108 CT, and it's a carbide tipped 8 TPI blade. And the first run, it actually cut through it pretty quickly at around 47.90 seconds. Then on the second run, slowed down significantly to 95.85 seconds. And then on the third run, it actually just did not finish. Okay, so if you go all the way back and look at the third run actually ran for about 215.85 seconds. That's a pretty long time. After that, we pretty much said, yeah, we're gonna stop running this test because no normal sane person is going to try to cut through that material using a dual blade for that long. It just doesn't really make too much sense. Okay, this carbide tipped Elite Series blade you can get for roughly around $11. You may or may not be able to get them in larger configurations depending on your area, or if you're willing to buy them online, but that's what it really says. Okay, so let's go take a look at the leaderboard and figure out how does this blade compare to the other blade we've tested for thick metal cutting. All right, so if you look at the leaderboard, we've already tested the Lennox brand in the previous episode, episode 11. So if you look at the leaderboard right now, first place is the Lennox Lazer CT carbide tipped blade. Then there is the DeWalt Elite Series carbide tipped blade, putting this carbide tipped blade in second place, right behind the Lennox. And obviously the two bimetal blades from both Lennox and DeWalt just did not finish. We're just putting the Lennox one just a little bit ahead, mainly because it costs just barely a little bit less, right? You could argue they're pretty much the same, but we're all tied for last place here. So let's talk about the leaderboard for just a little bit. So both the Lazer CT and the Elite Series blade from Lennox and DeWalt are both made in the USA with global materials. Both of the marketing symbol that says made in USA are pretty much exactly the same. As we saw earlier, the blade design is almost exactly the same. Where they put the carbide on the teeth is exactly the same. Shape is exactly the same. And also the model numbers are very similar. Like we talked about earlier, the Lazer CT 9-inch blade was 9108 RCT, and the DeWalt 6-inch blade is 6108 CT, right? So most likely these are pretty much just copycat replicas of the blade, but for whatever reason, it does look like the Lennox blade does seem to perform better. It actually cut faster and lasted longer through the test on the same material. Okay, so maybe they want to try to keep that Lennox brand reputation up for the Lazer CT, and maybe they're using just a different slight carbide compound mix to make that carbide up, or maybe they rolled it a little bit differently. Who knows, right? So the point is that they're probably made in the same factory, but the Lennox brand is still kept at a higher level, if that even makes sense. All right, so what can we say about these blades, all right? So obviously, you know, DeWalt's been around for a long time. Stanley Black Decker's been around for a long time. They probably make pretty decent blades for the price. Would I go out and buy this 2X long life blade again? If I'm cutting, you know, regular material, probably would, especially at roughly around $3 per blade. But if I'm cutting thick metal, I would definitely not buy that blade, all right? So let's go ahead and answer that same question about the DeWalt Elite Series carbide tip blade, okay? So this one here, marketing, like we said earlier, says it says 25% longer life than the Diablo. So we're gonna have to test the Diablo and see if that's really true and how that stands up. But would I go out and buy this blade again? You know, that's a great question because this blade costs roughly around $11, right? The Lazer Carbide CT from Lennox costs around $14, and that's the 9-inch version. I'm sure the 6-inch or shorter version probably costs the same amount. So if I had the question, would I go out and buy this blade again? Probably not, mainly because I would just go buy the Lennox version, because the Lennox version is probably the same price, if not cheaper, for better performance, right? So I would probably buy that one. But the thing that really interests me is, like I said earlier, I'm not sure why DeWalt decided to pretty much, or Stanley Black Decker decided to pretty much copy the blade and put it under the DeWalt name, mainly because, you know, they are being sold in the same store in the same places, right? It's not like the Lennox is being sold at Home Depot and this is being sold at Lowe's. They're actually both only sold at Lowe's, right? You can buy them online, different places, but you know, that's an interesting thing that's kind of going on there. I'm not sure if it's really worth eating at their own market share. I'm just jibber jabbering at this point. So, you know, hopefully this video helped you guys out. If you have any questions, or you know why they decided to do all this stuff, maybe they're trying to compete with Milwaukee or something. Who knows? I don't know. But if you have any ideas, let us know. Otherwise, have a great day, get back to work, and we'll see you guys next time.